He says that. He texted me, "I miss you," like 3 times a day.
He got his finger stuck on the repeat button.
He kept on getting it. Normally I don't do to be continued messages, but I really thought last Wednesday was going really well, and I really wanted to go through some more of it. So I actually am doing kind of a to be continued from last week. Now, I found out something funny this weekend, and that is that I'm apparently not used to as tight a time schedule. I told a couple of you guys this, that when I write a message, I know exactly how many pages, I need to be at or whatever. So I'd written about 3 pages of notes on this. I wanted to read 10 passages of Scripture, and after the 10 passages of Scripture, I wanted to make 3 points about the passages. Except that I was doing their early service, which you can only preach 24 minutes on, and as soon as I got to passage number 7, the musicians came up. So I was like, the last of them were like super fast. But we did get through them. Last week we were talking about generational curses, so this week I thought we'd call them generational blessings, because how many of you know not everything your parents do to you is bad? Right? Hopefully, right? I mean, my own kids can say not everything you do is bad. Sometimes you feed me, and that's good, right? Did you die? No. Who was I talking to today? I said when you have a baby, especially baby boys, you realize as a parent your main job is to keep them from killing themselves, because they are trying to kill themselves, and you're trying to stand between them and certain death, right? So your parents have done something good for you because you're alive, okay? Now here's the first question. I want you to think about it for a second, and I'm going to start asking for volunteers to just kind of tell. Why would someone love you?
Because I am amazing and awesome.
That's my kid. That is self-esteem right there. Go ahead, Russ.
I said humble too.
And humble. Someone else. Why would anyone love you? I know this has never happened in this room, but sometime when people who've been together a while fight, they'll say things like, "I'm the only one that loves you, and no one else would put up with you, and no one else would do what I'd have to do to be with you." And I haven't seen a lot of smirks. I'm not going to make eye contact anywhere. I'm just going to look up, because sometimes people get in arguments and fights, and they'll say things like that, won't they? In fact, it's not a coincidence that the person you are married to is statistically the most likely to murder you. If you get killed, the first person they talk to is the husband or the wife, right? And I've always said, if it looks like Kristen may have murdered me, let her go. I probably earned it. That was probably my fault, and it was justified. But it's one of those things that it doesn't always get set right in us. It doesn't get put right in us. And sometimes it doesn't get put right in us from the very beginning, right? Like sometimes we grow up in an environment where it's a lot easier to pick out what you're doing wrong than what you're doing right, right? Because as a parent, I'll admit this, I'm not like, "Hey, I need to go watch my kids to see what they do well today." Okay, do something, right? I'm just going to watch you, see what you do well, right? But if you mess up, then it's immediately on my mind, right? Like did any of you guys go through this growing up? Was it just me? Did you guys all have parents that just all the time, "You're the most best, wonderful kid in the whole world," right?
They weren't talking to you.
Somebody tell me, why would someone love you? Give me an answer.
Your actions.
Your actions? Someone loves you because you do nice things for them? Say?
Nice things for them, nice things for others.
Okay.
Passion.
Compassion?
For someone to love you, you have to be lovable.
You have to be
There are some
lovable?
people that just aren't.
There are some people that do their best to not be loved, don't they?
I am a teddy bear.
Okay, go ahead, Christy.
Unconditional.
Unconditional? How many people have someone in their life that loves them unconditionally? I actually do. I always joke with the kids, don't be mean to your mom. She can't help but love you, right? It's not a choice for her. She can't turn that off, right? And yet it always seems the mom's the one that gets the short shrift when the kids go through the rebellious phase, right? When the kids go through the rebellious phase, they're not usually rebelling against dad so much as they are mom. Give your hand up. Oh, okay. It was there. So someone would love you because you're lovable. Someone would love you unconditionally, perhaps. I don't think people are normally good at loving unconditionally. I think that's a learned behavior, right? Why else would someone love you? Somebody tell me how you knew your parents loved you. How many of you your parents actually loved you? 3 of you? Rest of you? Okay, you don't have to answer this then. But how did you know your parents loved you? Do you have a good one for me, Robin?
Not really.
But they did, right? But they did.
They did.
I never had any qualms about them not letting me stay overnight.
They loved you so much they'd let you go stay anywhere.
No.
Lock the door when you came back.
there overnight.
Oh,
In my house.
in your house. Yeah. You know, here's an amazing thing. So this weekend, I go back to Kentucky. I'm going to do a wedding on Friday, and after I get done with the wedding, I've got to finish preparing my sermon, meet with the pastor of the church. I've got to preach on Sunday. After that, I've already got a lunch appointment set up because we got to go out with certain people because they're back in town. And then after that lunch appointment, I'm heading back, and that was my schedule. So my mom still drives an hour and 15 out from the countryside to see me preach, and my entire time I got to spend with my mom this weekend was her coming to me and saying, "You're so good, you're so awesome, I love you so much, you're just the best preacher." And she hugged me, "I love you too. Are you going to lunch?" I was like, "Yeah, Mom, I got to go to lunch with somebody else." "Okay, blah, blah." And then that was it. That was but you know what's funny is she spent that whole time, right, telling me how awesome I was and how good I was, right? Now listen, I give my mom a hard time about a lot of things, but she knows how to encourage, right? So I know I was loved by my mom because she encouraged me. So if I were to say, how do I know I'm loved by her, that would be one of the things that I know, right? How do you know you're loved by your spouse? Somebody give me something. You know your spouse loves you because... You said unconditional, now you have to give one, Christy.
She loved me because she didn't know.
Because what?
I see it in his lives. I see it every movement, everything he says, everything he does. It's about taking care of us and loving you.
Well, gosh, John, I want to marry you now. If you're... Okay. You're doing a great job selling. I can tell you that. You're doing a great job selling. Come on, June, you've got to have something good on Wayne. Come on now. That man lives and breathes for you. He does, doesn't he? Wayne, I bet he wakes up in the morning, he's like, "What can I do for June right now?" Right? He does. So, somebody go to Mark 3:33-35. Don't read it yet. Let's ask this question. Why does Jesus love you?
Because the Bible tells us so.
Does Jesus love you because of what you do?
No.
Does he love you because of what you say?
No.
Does he love you because of how you perform?
No.
What do you mean he has to? Oh, that's right. Right, but why does he have to? The Bible says God hates iniquity, right? There's a couple different places where God says he hates something. I know hate in our generation right now is just a dirty word. You can't hate anything ever. But I don't think that's actually true. I think we just have kind of a hang up on the word hate.
God hates things.
7 days does the Lord hate. Right, what is it? Feet that are quick to shed blood. People who cause division. Liars.
Yeah, it's
Right.
terrible list.
Oh, you know, that whole list is almost all things you do with things you do with communication, right? All things that you say, right? Causing division. You're quick to, go talk behind somebody's back, those sorts of things. God loves us because God is love, right? And his disposition towards us is always love. The thing that people trip on, of course, is that God is also holy. And when God sets out a rule and says this is the rule, there are times when people go on the other side of that rule and they don't find out so much that God is punishing them so much as their actions punish themselves, because the wages of sin is death, right? And whether or not God directly intervenes when you live a life of sin or where you let sin into your life, it will bring death, one way or the other. There's no way out of it. I've tried. Right? I've looked for the loopholes. I'm like, there's got to be some way I can just kind of do what I want and get away with stuff, and God's not going to be mad about it. That has anything to do with God set the rules in place that say the wages of sin is death, and any sin you let in your life will bring death. That's why he doesn't want you to sin, because he loves you. Now, somebody read Mark 33-35. Do you have it, Mona?
And he answered them, saying, "Who is my mother or my brother? And he looked around about on those who sat about him, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of God, the same is my brother, and my sister, and my mother.
So Jesus is actually saying here, this is an interesting thing because Jesus' family is looking for him. His mom and his brothers are looking for him. And Jesus says, who's my mother and my brothers? Those who do the will of the Father, the same are my mothers and brothers. I love another place in John where Jesus says, I no longer call you servants because servants don't know what the master is doing. Right? That there's a level of relationship that you can have with Christ where you become part of his family, his brothers and his sisters. Right? That we'll get to that. We're going to do 3, and then we're going to go to our list over here. So, the thing is, when Jesus is talking about here, we talked about this last week, where he says, you have to be willing to abandon your past and abandon what your family taught you sometimes, and abandon what you came out of in order to follow him. That sometimes he's going to ask you to follow him, and it's going to go against things that you were raised believing. I was raised believing there was a time when people in the world thought the earth was flat. Anybody taught that in school? They thought that Columbus was afraid that he was going to fall off the edge of the earth. And did you know that was completely made up by a guy who wrote school books back in the 70s or 50s or something like that? That Columbus knew the world was round, but he had underestimated how big it was. Everybody knew the world was round because he'd been sailing ships for thousands of years. The ancient Greeks knew the world was round. The ancient Romans knew the world was round. But they figured by how much the curvature of the earth was, that it was so big that they wouldn't be able to make the journey all the way over. And Columbus was just trying to go further than anybody had ever gone. But he knew the world was round. But I was raised to believe that. And when I told somebody else that, and I was like, hey, look at this. I did not realize this. But when you look at the ancient documents, they knew this. That person was mad at me. Like I was just coming against a doctrine of God that no, the earth, they thought it was flat and they were going to fall off, and the Catholic Church was all mad about it, and none of that happened. Did you know that? Isn't that crazy? But we were taught that. We're taught that by teachers. Teachers don't lie. They're never wrong. They know everything. Right? Huh? I somehow got it in my head when I was a kid when they were talking about the vowels were A, E, I, O, E, U, sometimes Y, and because it rhymed, I just added the word in my head and sometimes W. So I went through about 4 years of grade school thinking W could be a vowel. Right? And I'm pretty sure a teacher affirmed me on that. So I went through it, but at some point I had to say to myself, wait a second, that's not actually true. We often have a hard time examining our past and looking for places where we or our parents or somebody in authority over us might have been wrong. Right? Because I love my parents, and it pains me to think they ever did anything that was not just, God breathed in from heaven, because they were my parents. They were superheroes, right? But you live long enough to see your parents, in the light of adulthood, and you realize they're people. And they didn't always mean to do everything they did they? Sometimes, I've told my kids that sometimes I just don't know what the other thing is you would do. I was thinking this morning, I've been dragged down the center of a church and whooped in the basement, right? Never did that to my kids, but there are times where I thought about it, right? But I was preaching, so it'd be difficult. Hold on a second. Can somebody else give me a reason why sometimes people are afraid to examine what has happened to them in the past, or why things in the past happened?
Your whole life you're told not to live in the past.
You are told not to live in the past. It doesn't make it not exist, though, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't make it hurt less if you went through something bad, does it?
The exception would be when I overheard in that chapel, the actual voices from everlasting. That was not a joke, but there were only two that heard it besides me. There was only two. That was the pastor and the person from
Okay.
Christ, and he was carried out.
Okay.
He was carried out.
Someone else. Why do we have trouble? Why do we have trouble digging up the past?
I think it'll remind you of the times messed up.
Reminds you of the times you messed up? Has anybody ever been like, hey, it's time to go to bed, and your brain is like, hey, remember that time you had a really awkward conversation 3 years ago and you looked like an idiot talking to that person? You should think about that for about 20 minutes now instead of going to sleep. Anyone ever done that?
Oh, yes.
It's hard, isn't it? It's hard to go back and think about, oh my gosh, you know, how much Aquanet did I have in the 80s, right? My hair was so, I really thought, because back then we all had to part our hair in the middle. It was a thing, right? And I had to feather it. Remember the guy on WKRP in Cincinnati had the feathered hair? We all wanted to be like him, right? It's hard to think about the fact that you weren't always as perfect as you are today, right? That what you are today, that took some work, took some effort, right? And it's hard sometimes to go back, especially if there's something in the past that hurt the first time you went through it, right? We don't like to relive those kind of things.
I think the devil brings it up to you though all the time. So anytime you have any kind of, you're walking with God, he'll bring up something you did in the past so that it knocks you back down to the past.
He does. What's the difference between the Holy Spirit convicting you of a sin and the devil throwing one in your face?
Big difference, because if the Holy Spirit convicts you of the sin, you're guilty of the sin. But him throwing it in your face, he's trying to convict you of the sin.
Condemnation. Satan gives you condemnation.
Yes.
The Holy Spirit brings conviction.
It's like, I always said there's a difference between discipline and punishment. And the difference between discipline and punishment is the intention. Right? Then my dad spanked me with a certain number of, in his mind he was going to spank me like exactly this many times. He had this whole, and he gave he was really good about explaining why he's spanking me, which didn't help. Right? I mean, it helps now, but at the time it's like, well, maybe you could just not spank me and we'll just call it a wash. Right? But even when my dad punished me, I understood that he was trying to bring good out of me. Right? But there are other times when you got into conflict with somebody and they weren't trying to bring the good out of you, they were trying to destroy you.
You weren't really sure that when that was happening.
With my dad, I was. My dad actually gave a pre- and post-spank talk. He came in with the pre-talk and said, you're my son and I love you and what you did was wrong and now I'm going to spank you, and then he would spank. And afterwards he would wait till that thing you got to do when you're a kid and you're crying, you come back in and he'd say, you're still my son and I love you. And, so we had the pre and post, and so I understood the purpose of it, right? But it wasn't pleasant, didn't make it. It's like, well, we could just do the talk part, right? That worked. If we talked, I'm good. The intention behind it, right? Because sometimes people do things because they intend to hurt you or they intend to well, how do we end up with stuff in our family past that we struggle with into our 30s, into our 40s? Some people even longer than that, right? 50s. I mean, do you have anything in your past you're still dealing with, Laverne? You're about as high up as we can get. So as you were growing up, let's examine for a second the rules of engagement, because the rules of engagement are basically when you make your household. Okay, my mom grew up in this very dysfunctional, abusive household, right? So everything she did, she automatically, by just not being her dad, did better than her family did to her, right? It was a very low bar he set for being a decent parent, and she got over that, right? But at the same point, there were definitely things that I learned in my past that I had to unlearn as I grew up. So starting with family, what did you learn about family from your family? Let me give a couple of examples. Did you learn that you owe your family for all they've done for you? No, you didn't? No one ever had that? Like you felt like you owed them? Where are our Italian families at? Right? How about don't air any dirty laundry? Don't talk about this to anybody else. No one outside the family gets to know this. Right? Anybody ever been a preacher's kid? Oh, the whole list of things you can't talk about that go on in the house when you're a preacher's kid. Guess how that worked out for me? Just guess. Right? What about duty to family above all? Blood is thicker than water. That family is the most important, right?
Depends on how much spaghetti they feed you.
My family would feed you a lot. You couldn't get through our house without my mom feeding you. That was a rule. She would feed you. So what does the Bible teach us about family? This is an easy one because I just read some of it. That we're all family. That family is not something you're born with. It's something you're born again into, right? You're born into a natural family, and you're born again into a spiritual family. Here's the big question. You guys ready? Should your church family be more important than your normal family, your natural family? Lots of times they are. I can tell you this. Everybody in the New Testament in here would have said yes, without a hesitation. Right? In 1 Corinthians, if you were in the church in Corinth and they asked you, is your church family more important than your natural family? They would have said yes, because most of the time they were coming out of a family that was still in a pagan system, that under the Roman law, they would actually turn in family members so they wouldn't get in trouble if you were a Christian, and you could lose property, you could lose your rights, you could even lose your life. And so they would say, without hesitation, that my church family is more important.
Well, family is so important that isn't that why the young boys join gangs? Because they need,
They're looking for a sense of belonging.
yes. Somebody tell them what to do and how to do it and when to do it.
Here's a great question. Has anyone ever felt like you didn't belong in your own family?
Oh, yeah.
And the church said,
Yes.
Amen.
Right. I was their slave.
Go ahead, come on, Sharon. What'd you say?
I said I was their slave.
You were their slave? Oh. You guys want to hear a really funny story that my mom's watching tonight to crack her up? That when I was 12, I guess, that she was telling me to do something, and looking back, it was something stupid that I could have just done in 5 minutes if I'd have just shut up and done it. But I looked at my mom and said, if you want a slave, why don't you buy one? That's what I said. Guess how whooped I got, right? That was, and she always remembers that one. Still brings that one up, right? Still brings that one up. There is a point at which you don't feel like you fit in your family anymore. There's a point at which, if your life is going according to plan, you're going to feel like you outgrew your family. Especially if your family is not in the Lord. Right? If you come out of a lost family, if you come out of a lost background, there's going to be a point at which you feel like your life is moving forward and they're still kind of the same thing. Because there is a point in emotional and spiritual development that you do not get past until you come to terms with who God is in the person of Jesus Christ. Until you, in your heart, figure that out. Until you get peace with God. Until you understand your place in His story. You kind of stay in the same place, and you kind of rewrite the same story over and over again.
Old things put away and everything becomes new.
Old things put away. And right before that, I think it was, for when I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child. When I became an adult, I put away childish things. And that actually leads right into, because now we see through a glass darkly, for we know in part, we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect comes to pass, all of this other stuff will pass away. And did you know that when you know Christ, when you really know Christ, you're going to outgrow people who don't. And sometimes you will outgrow the people that do. How many of you have been around a Christian that's been a Christian for as long as Christians have been Christians and don't act any different than anybody you ever met in the world?
Yep.
Have you ever been in a church where you felt like you were out of place?
Yes.
Right? Why is that?
When I was in, went over to where my brother's wife came from, and I went over there for a visit, and they turned the ladies, all came out to look me over, and then I knew that they were not good.
I've a couple times told them to go poke you with a stick to see, see if you bite.
And they were true too, because what happened, that's where my brother's wife came from, and she really, she had to pay her servants part of what she took.
Yeah.
She was taking that, things.
When I was going to Methodist, that's because they were teaching religion,
In other words, it
not
was set up.
gospel.
It was set up.
It just, I don't know how to say it, just they weren't.
I might help you with that here in a second. So you went there, they were kind of just preaching the religious observance, the ceremony or whatnot. but there was no gospel behind it. Somebody else, ever been in a church where you just didn't feel like you fit in?
There was that one that was using as a corporate monopoly to make money.
Okay.
One of them was the Baptist.
That's where I was.
One of them was the Baptist church.
What was the
I
Baptist
at
church?
for a long time.
Someone else.
I was raised in a church since the age of 6, raised my children in the church, taught the whole thing. When my youngest son was 18, I believe, he was arrested. At that point in time, I was teaching the youth group. And following Sunday, the labor news had my story. Nobody was in my class. Everybody pulled their kids out of my class. Nobody would sit in the pew. Needless to say, I walked out of that church.
Oh my gosh.
John and I attended church for
Oh, yes.
and I just didn't act godly. And what I had expected and what I had explained to my husband for several years prior to being in this area because I had always said such great things about the specific order, and they didn't live up to what I had told them about the Baptist church, and because he was not raised Baptist, and
Let me, yeah. So, back in the 1800s, about the turn of the century, about the after the Civil War, so 1880s, 1890s, 1900, people started realizing that there was something wrong with the church, that the churches weren't growing. Like, everybody was going to church, right? But there just seemed to be no purpose in it. There was no real reason to, right? Because it was kind of the same 5 sermons and the same 5 altar calls, and nothing was happening. Did you know that the reason why, as far as I can tell, I don't know all of God's purpose in everything, but I can tell you this: the Holy Spirit had to be poured out again like it was poured out, because there was something sorely lacking without it there. The church became this thing where we did not expect God to be there. Right? We were expected to be there, but nobody expected God to be there. Right? Nothing supernatural about it. See, natural church can only get so far. And if you're in a natural place and you're kind of in a natural state of mind, then you can kind of use the rituals and the religion around it to kind of keep you at ease. But if God starts doing something supernatural in your life, then a natural church isn't going to fit you anymore. Right? If God starts talking to your heart, then you've got to be in a church where you're going to actually grow. Now, here's an interesting thing, and I'll say this in all honesty. There are some preachers that I absolutely love that are really great year 1 to 3 preachers. That from your first year being under them to the 3rd year will be the best time of your life. But by that 4th year, you will want to pull your hair out. Because they're really good at that level of development. Right? And I've sat under some. I love some of them. There's one of but I always knew that once you got to a certain point, that was really about how high you could go. That's why I really want our church to be kind of church 201, because I think there's a lot of church 101 out there. Right? I feel like if you kind of want a very basic, simple, non-challenging church, you have a lot of options. Right? I don't think we have a lot of options for churches that are going to spiritually challenge and move people and try and take them to that next place. Right? So, if God is moving in your life and you're in a church and you don't feel comfortable, and again, don't give the church a hard time, because sometimes that's all they can bring to the table, right? I would say, get off that. Look off that. Good. All right. So growing up, somebody tell me what you learned in your house growing up about anger. Anybody see any anger in their house growing up? I know somebody back there did. A little bit? A little bit? Somebody tell me what the anger in your house about you, Paul. You had good stuff last week, so yeah, no.
The anger was mostly directed towards me.
You were the object of anger? Good.
Some of it rightfully so.
Some of it you earn, right? But what were you taught about how you express anger? Was it something you kept under control, or was it just
We had to keep it under control.
you had to keep your anger under control?
When I heard that my brother's son happened to him, that happened to him, they took it for a large sum of money. I was upset, but
Were you allowed to show anger?
no, I didn't do that, but I wasn't very pleased. I'm not very pleased.
How was anger handled in your house?
Sour.
Oh, that sounds
You know, it was not good.
My dad was the ultimate rule, and you either obeyed him or you paid dearly, and for a long, long time. And he rolled over my mom with an ultimate rule, and she better obey.
So were you allowed to show any anger?
Absolutely not. We were not allowed to step out of line anyway.
So it was kind of like the person in power got all the anger, and everybody else had to have all the self-control. Right?
You must have made a man when
We heard the anger, yeah. Brother and I went to live.
they must have got.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing, because sometimes anger doesn't come out as shouting. Anybody live in a house where anger came out as sarcasm? Passive-aggressive anger. Especially when you don't have the power to be angry back, then what you do then is you throw the little digs, right? Because you can't be open about it, but you can kind of dig. Did you have something, Christy?
My stepdad was rather sarcastic, but I guess I was just too obtuse to realize it was, sarcasm. I thought he was being funny and I laughed about it.
I share that with you. Oftentimes people are mad at me and I don't know. Because sometimes you have to tell me you're mad at me. You have to say, Pastor, I'm upset with you. I'm like, oh, well, let me be heard. You shake that into my spirit. I honestly assume everybody wants the best for me every time they see me. I do automatically assume that. You know what, though? You know what that makes my life like? Pretty awesome. Because I know this, Kristen has discernment, and the problem with having discernment is she picks up on things that I have no idea happened, right? Like, she'll be like, did you see how that cashier treated you? And I'll be like, no. Why? It was great. Right?
Can I ask a question, if you can hear me?
Sure.
I'm curious with Kristen, how she was raised. How did that go into your marriage? So she can be openly about her feelings.
Have you ever been openly angry with me?
I really don't get angry, and if I do, I rarely get angry, and I learn, I'm a peacekeeper almost at any cost, even if it makes me sick to my stomach, because I guess the way I was raised, you didn't express your anger, and there was such a punishment for it if you did, that I kind of went the other way, and I'll just try to make things nice, I would try to pick up the pieces from my mom and make it so my dad wouldn't be mad at her, and I still do that in my adult life.
She's been mad at me, and I've had to convince her to tell me she was mad at me. Right? Because it's there. She's sitting there, she's making a little voodoo doll of you and sticking pins in it. You're like, honey, is there something wrong? Sticking the pins in there. So what does the Bible teach us about showing anger?
Be angry and sin not.
Be angry and sin not. How are you angry and sin not? Colleen, you're mad at me. I did something stupid, right? So, and you're mad at me. How do you show that, but you don't sin?
I believe I would not take offense at it, at what you did that made me angry, but yet I will figure that out. Because if I don't tell you, then you don't know, then you're oblivious.
The proper way to express anger is to tell somebody you're mad at them and why you're mad. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to convince them why what they did was so bad. Right? You can't just say, hey, Russell, I'm kind of mad at you because you parked in my spot. I had to say something along the lines of, you are so inconsiderate and don't think about anybody else and just park your car wherever you want. Now all of a sudden I'm making it a combat. I'm coming at you, right? Instead of just saying, hey, that was my spot. That's kind of where I park. It's got my name on it, right? Instead of expressing why I'm upset, all of a sudden we got to carry the weight of that argument and put it on them. You're a bad person because you did something that makes me angry. I'm not angry. It's not my fault I'm angry. It's your fault because you're terrible, right?
Make them pay for it.
We make them pay for it. Get your pound of flesh. Right? And that is not That is not biblical.
Hand them the head on the platter.
Hand them the head on the platter. All right. Grief. Any boys ever told they couldn't show weakness? Ever told you boys can't cry? You can't look like it hurts. You can't, right? Anybody ever been depressed and someone said, get over it? Did you immediately get over it when they said, get over it? You know what? If I have a superpower, it's that when I'm depressed, Krista can say, get over it, and I probably will. I'll still carry on the show for a little bit because I don't want her to think it worked, you know? But she's actually a pretty good encourager, and a lot of times I gotta pout because she might give me something like food, right? But she's pretty good at getting me through that. But a lot of times people are really hurting or really depressed. And you know why we say get over it? Do you know why we say that? Because we don't know what else to say. Man, I'm sorry you're hurt. It bothers us, right? If I see you depressed, Sharon, I'm bothered by that, right? And here's the thing, this thing about bearing one another's burdens. Do you know sometimes something is really weighing on Kristen's soul, and just by she and I being around each other, all of a sudden it'll weigh on my soul too, but now it weighs a little less on hers? Did you know you could do that for people? Now it's tough because some people seem to have a lot of that burden, right? They seem to just carry a lot of that around. But if they're willing to let go, if they're willing to give you some of that, then standing by them and asking them for it can be a great blessing to them. And the Bible says that we're to bear one another's burdens. Right? Physical affection. How many of you come from physically affectionate households? I'm going to say anybody? Gloria. Me and Gloria. Thank you, Gloria. High five. Yeah. I'll pick on June. June, what did you learn from your parents about physical affection?
Nothing. Because when I met Wayne was very affectionate, and when he touched you and kissed you, it's like I couldn't take it at first because I was not brought up there for anybody to show affection to me.
Completely alien to your way of thinking. I knew a husband and wife once that I never heard them say a nice thing to each other, but if they sat on the couch, he'd hang his leg over her. And you know what? You know what hit me though? He's trying something. You know, I don't think he knew how to communicate a nice thought out of his mouth, but he did know at least how to do that. And so to me, I kind of gave him a little mercy and said, you know what? He's got that much, man. You got this much. Work with that, right?
It could have been a possession thing too.
It could have just been a comfort thing for all I know. I'm trying to be nice to him, okay? I'm trying to show some mercy here, okay? Any of you married couples or were married or whatever, did you get into that thing and then not know how you were supposed to treat them as far as affection went? Right? I grew up with a mom that hugged all over me, like I said, when I'm all preaching, and I'm all, hey, I'm a big preacher, man. She just, grabbed me, ruffling my hair and everything, because she's mom, right? That's what she does. Did that ever drive you crazy when we first got married? That was always,
Only because she wanted the feathered hair back for like the first 5 years. Every time she saw you really got to get back with the feathered hair.
She really did want me back with that. I think this is a WKRP thing still. Someone else have a different experience with physical affection, like before you were married because of what you saw in your family, and then after it was completely different? Or even after you were grown up and you realized that not everybody interacted the way your family did? Anyone want to volunteer some information? Don't be calling people.
I think it actually made me more wanting physical affection from the lack of physical affection.
Because you're thinking, somebody out there must be getting physical affection.
I mean, my parents were always, they were verbally supportive of stuff. Hey, good job. Hey, but I don't think my dad hugged me until I was 19. I mean, and that was a weird thing.
Because at 19 you're like, what do I do with this?
What are you doing? And then he gave me the birds and the bees at 20, and I'm like, hey, I'm 20. I'm in college, Dad.
They had
I haven't lived with you for years.
After I sobered up and found the Lord, I enjoyed the hugging and just stuff like that. And I actually taught my mom how to hug, and she loved it.
Yeah, you know, and I had an article today, and I sent it to somebody else because they were talking about the little things kids have now where they spit them. What do they call them? The little, you know what I'm talking about? I know if anybody teaches, they hate those, right? But there's a thing about our sense of touch that we don't realize how important being touched is, right? We especially, I think, in marriage, because in marriage you get to that point where you're just like, well, they know, right? They know I love them, right? You know I love you, right? I don't have to say it. I don't have to, you know, hold your hand all the time. Sometimes she still holds my hand, and I'm like, I have to walk. What are we doing, right? Hold hands. This is inconvenient, right? When we were first married, though, it was, you know, arm in arm everywhere. Hey, baby, you know. I didn't mind that if she was in, you know, 12-inch heels or whatever she wore, that we had to take tiny little steps, right?
I have a grapefruit to get the juice out of it.
Yeah, squeeze it, squeeze it. How many of you have a different marriage than your parents, or had a different marriage than your parents? I hope so, right? Yeah.
Not at first.
Not at first?
It was just the same. And it's not what we wanted. But once God moved in each of our lives, that's when change took place.
Give the full story. That's a great synopsis. Give us the... No, that's great though, because you had learned things from your parents, and you're like, well, this must be what marriage is like.
We didn't know how to interact with each other because we didn't know how our parents interacted.
Their interaction was anger.
Yeah, we saw their end of it, but it was hard to relate. How do I do that with her, or do I not do that?
Right, because they're your frame of reference, right? Here's a great thought. Should a Christian marriage be different than a non-Christian marriage? Okay, so let's take marriage as a state institution. You know, the state of Illinois recognizes a marriage versus God has ordained a marriage. How would a marriage not bound by what we know as Christians be different than a marriage that is? I wrote wedding vows this weekend, so I've got a great answer. But I'll let you guys go first.
Alimony.
Alimony, yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? We know this. Statistically, in the past decade, there have been no difference statistically between the number of divorces in a church and the number of the divorces outside the church. Right? So, obviously we're missing something, right? Or we're not figuring something out. So how does a marriage look different? Can someone tell me what the Bible teaches about marriage?
Well, you have God, and then you have the husband and the wife. So, it's submission.
Submission? That one gets a lot of play.
It does.
It does. I love preaching on submission. Always gets you all the amens when you preach on submission. How else is a marriage? What does the Bible teach about marriage?
Leave and cleave.
Leave and cleave. When I was writing the vows, I said, and we're putting in the forsaking all others, right? There has to be that forsaking all others. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, right? That means that the wife has more say-so than his mom. Anybody ever seen a husband struggle with that? Anyone ever see a couple? It took them a couple of tries to realize that once you're married, right, biblically, according to the Bible, your spouse should be more important than your parents. That's crazy, right? I think that's more a Christian view than it is a world view, right? I don't think the world necessarily teaches that.
So where's the mother-in-law fit in?
Where's the mother-in-law fit in?
Well, the basement.
And there it is.
Shed. No, I love my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
No, I really do. I'm just I'm a fan.
Not because it's being broadcast in any way. He says of his own will and not under compulsion. So, when the Bible talks about marriage, not only does it talk about the man submit yourself to the wife submit yourself to the husband, it also tells the husband, tells them both to submit to each other. There's a thing about a true biblical marriage, right, where when God is the head of that thing, right, and this is what I was putting into the vows this weekend, that all of a sudden your victories aren't just your victories. See, a lot of times in a more worldly marriage, they want a manner of independence, right? I still have to be my own person. I don't want to lose my identity in this marriage. That's a big thing now. They don't want to lose who they are to this other person. I don't need them to define me, right? And yet in biblical marriage, there is the idea of two become one. Right? That all of a sudden, it's not just about your wishes, but it's about both of your wishes, and it's about God's will in the light of that. And that's kind of different than what the world teaches, right? But we have Christians going into marriages thinking, I get to keep all my identity and who I am, and we'll keep separate bank accounts, and she'll have her job and I'll have my job, and we'll be married, but it's kind of like a business-type transaction. And then, you know what we're going to run into? Same thing the world's going to run into, right? That if you're not willing to leave and cleave, to let part of your identity be given to that other person, if you don't love your wife as Christ loved the church, because God set aside being God to love us. Think about that. For God to come as Jesus Christ, how much did he have to give up? How much then should a man give up for his wife? Right? That he laid down his very identity, for he did not consider being one with God as something to be grasped. Being equal with God was not something he had to reach for. It was who he was, and yet he laid that aside to endure the shame of the cross because he loved the church. So how should a husband love his wife differently than in the world a husband would love his wife?
Top ratio, it's supposed to be 100-100, not 50-50.
Two half people don't make a whole person. They're just two half people, right? How much time we got? All right. Ooh, who wants to take that one? Where's Howdy Doody? What does the Bible teach about gender roles? Does it teach anything different than the world does about gender roles? Everybody said no. I'm the only one facing the camera.
There's no
Right?
such thing as a gender in the real world.
Yeah. Well, no, there is, but there's like 62 of them, right? There's like 73 genders now, right? Oddly enough, there's still only 2 combinations of chromosomes, but now we have 76 genders.
Double X, Y.
How did your family model gender roles to you? Did anybody grow up in a family where you kind of didn't like how one of the others were treated? Did you grow up thinking, I don't want to be, if that's how the mom is treated, I don't want to be the mom, or if that's how the dad gets treated, I don't want to be the dad? Anybody raised in a family like that? Where you're like, wow,
Just the way it was supposed to be.
just the way there was no questioning it, was there? You know what? That's the great thing about being the adult. We get to question it, right? The funny thing about being an adult is we get lazy, right? I think a lot of this, when we don't examine what happened in our past, is we just don't feel like rehashing it. It's painful. It's in the past. Don't bother with it. But the reason why we look at how some of these things were shown to us is because we got to figure out how we got to where we're at. Because sometimes where we're at isn't where we're supposed to be. In the military, the thing is if you lost your way in battle, you always went according to the last set of orders you were given. Right? So if you get broke off from your unit and you're just out there on your own, you know what the last set of orders you were given are, and you follow those. In fact, they found Japanese soldiers still fighting the war decades later because the last set of orders they said was commit guerrilla attacks against this place. And so for years they live in the jungle doing whatever they can to, right, because that was the last set of orders. If you don't go back and examine why it is you're doing, what you follow is the last thing you were told. And if the last example happened to be a terrible family example, sometimes by default you end up doing that. You don't let Scripture define what you do. You let where you come from define what you do. You don't let God tell you who you are. You let your family tell you who you are. You don't let your faith define you. You're defined instead by what you do or how you perform.
When we were having a Marine, be as shipmates, on board a ship, the rules of Navy are completely different from all the other forces.
Boy, howdy. And
they couldn't take it. They couldn't take it. They abandoned ship, is what they did. And they closed the seafloor.
I can attest to that. So here's the thing. What did your family teach you about church?
It's the rules.
You went because mother and dad said you go.
Mom and dad said you should go and you just went.
And that's what made you go.
They didn't go. They dropped you off, right? You walked. Somebody tell me what your parents taught you about church.
Sit still, don't
Where they
move.
send you, so they can be alone.
So they get some alone time.
Yep.
Did anybody have parents who were in church with them?
One at a time.
What did they teach you about how you act in church?
You stay quiet during the service. But you get involved in the church.
You get involved? Anybody? Go ahead.
My grandfather was a Pentecostal minister in the Assembly of God, so we never wore anything but a dress. You sat very quietly, and you made no ruckus, and you absolutely did not go to the bathroom because the guy next to you may have been getting a message from the Lord, and you interrupted it.
And here you go. Did anyone ever try to unwrap a mint in church as a kid?
Yes.
Right? And you are just the master of making the least amount of movement. Because any noise you create will bring down the wrath of God on that entire pew. Right? We're just, we were. Go ahead.
When you tried to open, at home it sounded innocuous, but at church it was like unwrapping a piece of candy out of bent.
I preach loud for you guys, okay? I do it for you out of the goodness of my heart. That's why. So that if you have to unwrap a mint, it is not the ultimate sin. But we were taught very much, sit down and shut up, right? Don't run the aisles, right? We had all these rules and behaviors as kids when you went into church. This is what you did and you didn't do. Now listen, some of that is good because you should have respect for the house of God. But you know, I always say things like, I don't care when babies cry in church or when they make noise or when there's the sounds of kids hustling and bustling, because we're family, right? And to me, if it's not distracting, right? I mean, and if God can't talk you through a baby's coo, maybe you need to search your heart, right? Maybe if some kid, you know, wrestling in their seat has completely separated you from the voice of God, maybe you need to strengthen your connection with that, right? Now, I'm not saying we got them coloring on the pews, unless, you know, you guys want to, so I get chairs. I'm kidding. Kidding. I know, she's going to get me. Don't kick me. You're too far out there, right? No. But we were taught not to speak in church. Most of us grew up in a church where the only people allowed to speak were the preacher, right? I mean, hey... I know one preacher that every Sunday teaches Sunday school, teaches church, and does a Bible study that afternoon, and then does a Sunday night service, and then does a Wednesday night service, and he does every single one of those. Because the preacher is the voice of the church. He's the only guy, right? But I love that verse in Corinthians that says, every time you come together, one should bring a word, and one should bring a scripture, and one should bring a song. But there's a sense of you don't come to the house of God to sit down and shut up, but you come to the house of God to minister before the Lord. You come to the house of God looking for someone that needs to be encouraged, looking for someone that might be struggling, looking for someone that you can give a word to or fellowship with or have something to bring to the house of God other than just your tithe. Right? We always say bring your tithe into the storehouse. Well, bring some praise into the storehouse.
When I was dating, my foster mom said that if we were going to go out on a Sunday night, they had service every Sunday night. We had to bring the guy to church first before we could go out on a date.
And you know what? You go a step further. If he can't sing the hymn without looking at the words, he's not the guy, right? If he's got to look at the words to "I'll Fly Away," this must be his first time, right? If he's looking at that book, he better be making, you know what I'm saying? So that's the question. Who taught you what church should or shouldn't be? Let me ask you guys this. Is absolutely everything you know about church, that you believe strongly about church, that you feel about church, what you got out of here? 100%. Like you don't have any opinions that may not be written down in this that you have about how a church should or shouldn't operate, how worship should be run. Who told us we do 2 songs and an offering? Right? 2 songs, an offering, and 3 more. Who did that? Right? No, you know what I did? I came the first time and just tried to follow and see what actually happened, right? I'm like, well, let's see what they do here, because, I'm taking over an established church. I want to make sure I'm doing it right. And it was kind of funny because I think the way the last pastor did it, everybody just kind of waited for him to do something. Well, I was the new guy, and I'm waiting for someone to do something. And for a little bit there, we were all just kind of sitting around waiting for someone to do something, weren't we? I think my first service here, too, I kept forgetting to tell people when to sit down. Right? Right. You may be seated, the most powerful words a minister utters. Everyone listens and obeys. You may be seated, and they all sit. They don't all stand when you say stand, but they will all sit when you say sit. Right? So who taught us what church should be? Because when Jesus gets mad, let me explain. When Jesus gets mad at the Pharisees, he keeps getting mad at them because they keep adding all these things to church that church isn't supposed to be. He keeps saying your traditions say this, but I tell you this. The Good Samaritan is a perfect example, because the Good Samaritan is the man gets mugged, he's beaten, he's laying on the side of the road, and a religious person walks by, a priest walks by, then a deacon walks by in our language, right? And then a Samaritan, which in our language would be whatever, filthy racial epithet you could put on somebody. Here's the Samaritan, but he's the one that stops and ministers to the man. And the question Jesus asks is, who then is his neighbor? And that's because the Jews had decided the only people that were their neighbor were other Jews. Now, luckily, we've not fallen into that ever again. Oh, except that, did you know that the reason why we did some of the stuff we did, that people used the Bible to defend slavery, that they used the Bible to defend what they did to the Indians, was because they said, well, they're not Christians, they're not our brother, we don't have to treat them like that. Did you know that? Did you know the church is always in danger of falling into the trap of saying that church is just the ones that believe like me, act like me, dress like me, have church like we do, and the rest of them we can treat how we want? We're always in danger of that. The enemy always uses that. Look at those guys. They're different than you. They don't do it like you do. They're doing it wrong. And the Baptists are, okay? I'm kidding. Right? But no, because listen, I'm meeting with pastors in the area, and I'm talking to them, and I'm fellowshipping with them, and some of them are just absolutely shocked that I would call them. I called one pastor because he'd had a heart attack in the pulpit. They had to take him out in an ambulance. So he's back in, and I called and I said, hey man, I heard you went through some stuff, and I just wanted to call and encourage you and say, hey, you're doing a great job. And could not believe a preacher of my denomination was talking to him. I'm like, what? Are you crazy? Right? Right? Because we were all these little K kingdom people. Right? I got my kingdom. Right? I don't want another preacher talking here because he could take people out of my congregation to his. If they'll leave you for him, let them. Right? I would say, if you're not called to our church, go. Be good where you need to be good. People that come to our church are called to be a part of this church because we have a calling on us. We have a mission. We have a job to do. And there are going to be people that walk through here and think, wow, I'd like to be a part of that, but they're not called to be here, and they may be called to be somewhere else. And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say, God bless you, man. Anything I can do for you. Right? Because we're big K kingdom people. We're God's kingdom people, right? We know our place not only in our own church, but in our community and in the kingdom of God. Because we're the best church. There are bigger churches. There are not better ones. Amen? I'm seeing persons come out. Okay. There's a whole thing about how does Joseph teach us about reconciliation that we won't get to. But when Joseph, we can't, right? Joseph's family comes back. He's like, hey guys, great to see you. They're all like, sorry about the murder thing. Oopsies, little sold you to slavery. Just, sorry. He's like, no, it's cool, right?
Sort of.
I think we're good there. I think we're good. All hearts and minds clear? You got one more for me, John?
Yeah, but I don't have it in the pocket.
Okay.